So while you guys are finishing that, I'm going to go ahead and start on the next dish that we're doing, like a marinated boneless half chicken. So I'm going to make a marinade first. I like to call this one Old Faithful. So I started cooking competitions when I was 9 through 4-H, and it was outdoor cooking competitions. And this was, pre-cell phone, internet, all the things. So I used to go to the library, check out books. My mom is an artist, but she's always been like very Martha Stewart. Like she always set the perfect table. She had an herb garden and all these things. And so when I was doing my cooking competitions, my mom had this beautiful herb garden, and she had seen in a Martha Stewart Living magazine how to make an herb brush. And then my world came full circle a few years ago. I actually got to cook with Martha, and I had my mom come down, and we made herb brushes as like the centerpiece for the table. So it was very special. But the first cooking competition I won, and I made this marinade that was super simple. And because I won once, I stuck with it throughout my whole time. And I don't actually use this in the restaurants a lot, but I use this at home on everything. I marinate pork, chicken, beef. I marinate everything in it. And that's why we call it Old Faithful. So back in the 80s, I used garlic salt. Now I use granulated garlic, right? So there's a difference between granulated garlic and garlic powder. Granulated garlic is just like it sounds, it's granulated, so it's not ground as fine. So granulated garlic is great if you want the flavor of garlic without using fresh, or for anything that has a longer cooking time. So that's why I love using granulated garlic sometimes in a marinade or in a salad dressing, like a Greek vinaigrette, as opposed to garlic powder, because I'm sure as you've seen with garlic powder, you go to shake it out of the container and it's almost like powdered sugar. It's like everywhere, right? It's so fine, it's really hard to control. So we like to, whenever we do use dried garlic, we like to use granulated. So we're gonna use about a teaspoon of granulated garlic. And we're gonna start with that in the bowl, and then we're using equal parts of apple cider vinegar. We're using tamari soy. I used regular old soy sauce back in the day too, but especially in the restaurants and with so many people having gluten sensitivities and celiac these days, we just exclusively use tamari so that we never have to worry about that. So it's a 1/4 cup of cider vinegar, a 1/4 cup of soy sauce. You could use regular soy at home. And then we're using a 1/4 cup of Dijon mustard. And so we're going to just whisk all this together to get the mustard nice and emulsified and just kind of broken down. And then to this, we're going to add a cup of oil. And one of the reasons I love to use this marinade at home is because it's very quick and it's very effective. So, at the restaurant, we spend like a few days cooking things, right? We take our time, we brine, we cure, we marinate. We have like a whole team of people just preparing food. But at home, I really don't want to do anything 3 days out. I'm already planning all that food at the restaurant, and you probably don't really want to either. So because this marinade is very flavorful, Dijon is strong, vinegar is strong, soy sauce is strong, and we're using high quantities of it, I put in there that if you're marinating like skin-on chicken or bone-in chicken, then 6 hours up to overnight. I wouldn't go past like 12, 14 hours. I mean, you can, but because it's very strong with soy, it's going to kind of like really marinate it. If you go past that point, then I wouldn't season it with salt at all, because you get so much salt into it. But this is a marinade that I make at home. I keep it in a jar, and whenever I can't figure out anything to do, I dump it on chicken before I go to work, and then I come home and I grill chicken, and it works, right? So that's why we call it Old Faithful. So my husband says, "What are we having tonight? Old Faithful?" I'm like, "Yes, we are." So this is, like I said, it's equal parts of soy, apple cider vinegar, Dijon mustard, and then olive oil and a little granulated garlic. So this is the vinaigrette, and we're just going to set this to the side. And then I thought it'd be fun. I don't expect you guys to debone a chicken at home, but I figured I'd show you something kind of chefy, right? So here we have a whole, roughly 3.5 pound chicken. They did leave me all the fun innards. Don't worry, I won't gross you out and do anything with that today. But you could, chicken liver mousse and stuff like that, but that's very fancy chef cooking. We're just going to, I dried the chicken off. There's a lot of controversy about whether you should wash your chicken or not, right? I always like to give it like a gentle rinse. One of the reasons that they say not to wash chicken is because you splatter the water and then you can cross-contaminate your sink or your countertop with salmonella, right? But I always like to give a little bit of water just to get some of the blood and the other things off from the bag. And then I usually pat it dry with paper towels. So you could do this with like skin on chicken breast. You can do it with skin on thighs. But we like to do kind of like a boneless chicken, so I thought I'd show you. I don't expect you to do this at home, right? But the way that we start is we're going to start at the breastbone, right, at the very beginning. And if you run your finger down, you can feel where the breastbone is, and that's the best place to start. So you want to use, if you have a boning knife or a fillet knife, that's great. You definitely don't want to use some big chef knife when you're trying to like break down a chicken or do some delicate kind of butcher work. Because your blade is bigger than the muscles are, and you're just going to kind of rip at it. You want a smaller knife that you have more control over, that you can do small strokes and kind of see what you're doing as you go. So we're just going to go on one side of the breastbone, and we're just going to make one long cut to go through the skin and to get on one side of that. And then from there, chicken is a very soft meat, so we can use our hands. We don't want to pull it, right? But we want to separate it so that we can start to see where the bone is. And then we're just going to use small strokes to just allow our knife to follow the muscle. And you're going to go around the rib cage, right? And you're just going to kind of keep feeling and just gently pulling on the breast as you go. And you're going to get to where the wing is. And you're going to be able to see where it kind of separates. I think you can kind of see that. So we're going to take the knife and just go through that. And you're going to go in between that joint. It's going to kind of feel like you're cutting through bone. But as you push your knife through, you'll be able to feel it separate very easily. If you start feeling like you're cutting through bone, then you are. Just slide your knife a little to the left or the right, right? I think people are just intimidated by it. And it's like, trial and error, right? I mean, so we're just going to keep using our knife and separating it. And then when you get the breast off, this part is like kind of the easier part. So here, you're going to grab the leg and you're just going to pull out, and it's going to separate the joint from the backbone. And then it's really easy for you to see where that is. So then we're just going to use our knife and go right in between. I think you guys can see that, right? Where it popped out. So we're just going to go right in between and start to cut down. And then we're just going to hold our knife against the backbone and just begin to cut down. So if you cut straight down, you're going to miss some of the thigh because some of that goes along the back. So we're just going to cut down on one side, and then we've separated out now the thigh and the leg. And we're going to continue down and just keep going through. And the idea is that you want to try and keep all of the skin, so just kind of keep an eye on that part. Now when you get to this point, like this one, the wing kind of fell underneath, so you want to make sure you're not cutting the wing. So just kind of pick it up and hold the wing in your hand, and then all you really have left is just a little bit of connective right there from where the wing is. So now we have half of the chicken, right? And so then from here, we always end up cutting off the wing because that's a lot to try and debone that. You're not going to get a whole lot out. And so what we do is we cut the wings off. We take kind of a heavier knife and snip the tips. And we save these, and we use these to make stock. And then we usually just put these in bags, and same kind of like the vegetable scrap, we collect these. And then whenever we have, it's a restaurant, there's a lot of people. When we ever have like 10 dozen, then we make everybody chicken wings, right? But you're probably only doing a couple, so save them, and then every time you do this, you'll end up with it. Or just roast these separately and have a snack while you're cooking, right? But we're gonna keep the wing to the side there. So now that we've removed half, so now we have our breast, right, which is completely boneless now, and then we've got our leg and our thigh together. So for this part, we want to pull the skin so that it completely covers, right? Now we're not working on the side where the skin is over the breast, right? We're on the inside so that the chicken breast, the meat on the inside closest to the bone is towards us. And then now we have the leg and the thigh, and we've pulled the skin over. So you're going to use your knife, and you're going to kind of use a Freddy Krueger stance, okay, right? So I know that there is a proper way to hold a chef knife, right, where you pinch it, put your hand underneath to protect it. Whenever you are going to cut into meat, though, and you're trying to fillet, Freddy Krueger, okay? I know that sounds crazy, but you have much more control with something like this. If you try and hold it this way, you're going to get carpal tunnel like I have, and you also really can't control when your wrist is this way. You can a lot when you're chopping, right? But when you're trying to go and pull a bone, Freddy Krueger, all right? So we've got the bone here, and you're just going to kind of feel, and you're going to feel that chicken leg, right? And so we're just going to take our knife, and we're just going to make little cuts so that we cut through the skin. And we're just going to follow the bone. So then now we're going to keep cutting, and we're going to cut where we feel the thigh bone. And so then from here, I'm just going to separate the skin because I want to keep the skin, right? And I'm going to separate the skin out. And then we're just going to keep that crazy stance, okay? Keep your other hand out of the way. And you're just going to make small, can you guys see? Small little strokes, right? So that you're separating the meat from the bone. There's no real fancy technical way. You just make these small little strokes until you start to see the bone start to come away, right? And so now we can see that, like, we've exposed the bone. Now we're going to hold a knife like a regular person, okay? And we're going to go right underneath the bone, and we're just going to kind of cut right below it. So then we have just the bone in our hand, right? Freddy Krueger stance, okay? We're going to go back to this part now, and we're going to start to go the same way with the leg. And we're going to go up towards the top. Now, once you get to the part that has the little knot from the joint, you don't really need to worry about trying to fillet off of that. Whenever you've eaten a chicken leg, you've probably noticed that when you cook it, it shrinks down, right? And then the leg's just out. And that has a lot of, like, tendons around it. So we're not real interested in trying to pull too much off of that. So same thing, I'm going to take my knife, holding like a normal person now, and we're going to feel, if you've probably noticed this, but in a chicken leg, they have an extra little bone beside it that can like splinter out. So we're going to feel for that, and I'm just going to kind of move my thumb and my forefinger under, and it's actually separating it from the bone. And I'm going to just pull on the skin, right? You just can't be afraid of it. You can be more aggressive than you think you can, right? So you're just going to pull on this, and then you can see, sorry, I'm messing with your camera. You can kind of see where it separates out, right? So then from here, we're just going to take our knife, holding it normal, and we're going to cut down through the skin so that we just have the bone now, right? But I did most of that with my finger, okay? And then now from here, we're just going to flip this chicken this way because I'm right-handed. And I'm going to do the same thing where I'm just going to make these small little strokes just where these two bones are connected because I moved both of them out of the way, right? And we're just going to go down one side. And then we're going to do the same thing here. And we're just going to kind of go. Now, I find that it's actually easier to hold the two bones together at this point so that you can get around the bottom because there's always a good amount of tendons in there too. So now we're going to go back to the other side, and you're just going to make these small strokes going back and forth until you start to feel it come away, right? And so then from here, I'm just going to take my knife, and I'm going to start to cut through and around it because I feel that I'm very close to the bone, so I don't really need to make those small strokes anymore, right? And then we're left with just the bone, okay? Now you're all going to go home and do this, right? No, probably not. I do make it look easy, though, right? So anyways, now we want to pull the skin, right, and make sure that the skin is nice and covered. Make sure there's no like random feathers or anything. And then sometimes you may have a good amount of excess skin. I love chicken skin. I'd leave it there. But if you have like a really big extra piece, you might want to trim it so that it's about the same size of the chicken. So now we have this. Now this naturally happened, but if your tenderloin, right, this little piece here, is still kind of attached, you just want to like run your hand underneath and fold it over. And it actually fills in that little gap where the breast and the thigh usually separate. And then it'll cook very easily. So now we're going to add this into our marinade. And then you guys are going to pretend that it sat here for a while, okay? And whenever we do, I'm going to take this. But a lot of times I'll put this in a Ziploc bag. And pour the marinade over, and it's just a good way to kind of massage it around. But now we're going to pretend. Now, I like to do this in like a cast iron, even if you have like a little flat top, griddle top, that works really well. You can use a stainless steel or a nonstick pan, but I just find that it's a little bit more consistent cooking if you were to use cast iron. This type of iron is carbon steel, and so I love these because they cook like cast iron, but they're very lightweight and they heat very fast. You see, I just turned that on and it's already smoking, right? So, and what's great about the like cast iron, you're like, oh my God. And I have a lot of cast iron, right? But these are great because they're very lightweight. And these days with Amazon, I mean, you guys can find anything. But if you look for a carbon steel pan, they're not bad. They're like $40 or so. They're pretty reasonable, but they're great because they're lightweight. So we want to get a pan pretty hot. And then I'm just going to add a little bit of, I'm using olive oil, not an extra virgin. You could also use a neutral cooking oil like canola or what have you. If you've marinated less than like 14 hours or so, then we still want to season with salt and pepper. If you've gone past that, then I would be just light, right? And so, let me put gloves on again. But when you take it out, you want to season the flesh side. Put a little bit of oil in your pan. All right, you guys are going to be okay if I don't use gloves. Putting gloves on wet hands never works. But then we're going to flip it over. And you want to make sure that you spread that skin out again, right? Because that's what's going to protect the flesh. And then I'm not going to touch my salt now. You're going to pretend that I just put salt and pepper on this. And so then we're going to go into the pan. We've put some oil in there. We've gotten it pretty hot. And we're going to lay it on the skin side down. And we're going to let this just cook at like a medium heat. And one of the reasons I love doing this chicken this way, especially in the restaurants, is chicken is like the hardest thing for chefs to cook because it always dries out, or you try and do it with the bone in, and then there's a little bit of blood rupture near the bone, and then people think it's raw. Sometimes it is. You know, there's always like a challenge, right? So I started doing this several years ago because it was a really great way to cook chicken. It would stay really flavorful. It wouldn't dry out and overcook. And so we used to do these a lot for like weddings and large groups and what have you. I'm going to go wash my hands so I can show you the next part while this cooks, okay? Okay, so while the chicken is cutting, I'm going to work on the next thing, which we're going to make salsa verde. So salsa verde, there's Mexican salsa verde, right, which is delicious. It's made with tomatillos. And then there's the Italian style of salsa verde that's made with a lot of herbs. Classically, it's made with anchovies as well. I did leave that part out for you guys today. But a lot of times if we do make salsa verde to go with fish, we do use anchovies. Just a little bit. It helps give it just a little bit more depth and flavor. But we're using capers instead, which lend a very similar flavor. It's also a way that we make like a vegan Caesar dressing, is that we use capers instead of anchovies, and then it's similar. I also really love using white anchovies. But we're going to use some of the collard greens from the farm. I'm very familiar with collard greens. My family had a farm growing up. But in true Southern fashion, we would let them grow to be like bushes, right? And then you would have to cook them for days to get them to be soft, right? And also because we just ate every vegetable cooked to death, which I think applies to a lot of people until this day and age. But the ones that they grow here at Kai Kai, I love because they're so tender. They're never like super firm and bitter. And so I like to use Diane's collards a lot in slaws instead of cabbage, in salads. And if you just go a little bit heavier on the acid than you would with like a lettuce, treat it almost like cabbage, I just find it to be super delicious. And because her collard greens are not overgrown, they're not bitter when they're raw, which I find a lot of times with raw collards, they become very bitter. But these are not. So I wanted to make kind of a sauce with them because I feel that sometimes, I don't know if Diane's listening, right? But you go and you go to a farm and you buy all these greens and stuff. And then you're like, oh my God, what am I going to do with all this? Like, I can only eat so many salads. And, you know, you can saute it like spinach, but that's kind of boring, right? But then you find that you might have a little bit left over. Also, same thing with herbs. You follow a recipe, you go to the store, and you buy a bunch of herbs. But if you're only cooking for 2, maybe 4 people, a bunch of herbs is a bunch of herbs, right? It's way more than you ever need. So salsa verde, this is kind of like chimichurri as well, is a great way to utilize all those different herbs. And I wrote you guys a recipe that features like some of my favorites. But really, you could do this with any herbs that you want. But we are using collard greens as the base. So today I've used some chives, which you could easily use scallions or the tops of like spring onions if you were to buy some spring onions from here. We're using tarragon. I love tarragon. It's very strong, but I find that if you buy tarragon to use for something, you're using like 1 sprig, and then you've got at least 4 more sprigs of the $3 package, right, to do something with. And then we're using some parsley and some dill. I use dill a lot. I like dill. But even if you were doing something with the fennel, you could use the fennel tops, right, because those are very herbaceous. But really, any kind of herb that you want, you could use the carrot tops as well. But we want to have a little bit of fragrance from the different herbs. And so for the collards, I've just cut the stems out, right? And then these are great to use in your stock and freezer if you want. And then we've just got, you know, the actual like flat leaf. And so now we're going to do what's called a chiffonade, right? And you may have heard of that before when it comes to basil. But it's a roll cut, right? And because we've cut these all about the same size, but normally it really doesn't matter. They don't have to be exactly the same. But you want to lay them all in front of you, roll them, right? And then we're going to take our knife and we're just going to make long, thin cuts. And because we're treating this like an herb and we're using it in a sauce, we do want to go smaller than what we normally would, right? But I think a lot of times, and I tell my cooks this all the time, is whenever you're chopping herbs, I feel like everybody's just like all over the board, right? You're doing like this little tango with your knife and you're back and forth, and next thing you know, your herbs are black, right? Because they bruise. And so if any herb that you cut, and I'll show you even with parsley, for instance, right? We're just gonna pick off the leaves, and I'm not picking off every stem, right? But I don't want any of the big stems. And so, you know, a lot of times you'll take this and then you'll just start cutting, right? But then you're left with just like these pieces of big leaves. So whether we're using basil or a leaf or not, I still use that same like chiffonade technique where I'm not really going to try and roll these tiny little parsley leaves, right? But I'm going to bundle them all up into my hand. And then I'm going to do small little cuts. And my cooks are always like, no, that's going to take forever. And I'm like, okay, here, you take the same amount and I'll take the same amount. And then I always finish before them because they're going back and forth so many times that it's not uniform, right? So even though I just did those little cuts, it's already pretty small, right? And then I'm just going to kind of move it around And then I'm just going to do the same thing. I'm just going to make small little cuts. And after doing this about 3 or 4 times, you have a pretty fine chop of herbs. If you do this back and forth, it'll eventually work. But also, if you think about it, your knife is just going like this, so it's just bruising. The way to really truly cut any type of green is you want to use the full blade of your knife, and that's why as chefs we're always using this kind of rocking motion, right? Because otherwise, and you may notice with your knives at home, your knives might be very dull in just one little section, right? And then they're very sharp on the tip or at the heel, and that's because that's where you're putting pressure. If you can try to teach yourself that when you cut something, you place the blade of your knife on your board and then use the whole blade to go through it. The edge on your knife will last a lot longer. So, hope that was helpful. But that's how we chop the parsley, and then I'm just going to check on the chicken real quick. Yeah, we're going to let it go a little bit longer. Let's turn the heat up. So now that I've chiffonaded the collard greens, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to turn it all to one side, and then I'm just going to chop through it again, just to make it a little bit smaller. But collards are very similar to herbs, especially when they're tender like this. The more you chop them, they're going to eventually bruise and release some of their liquid, and they will turn black. So that's why we don't want to overly chop them. But you can see just even from like 3 collard leaves, like that gave us a pretty good amount of collards. And to make the sauce, we really don't need much. So to make the salsa verde, we're going to take the collards, and then I have some other herbs that I've pre-chopped. And like I said, you could do cilantro if you want. You don't have to if it tastes like soap to you. You do basil if you want. You want to use a couple of things, though, to make it fragrant. So I've got some tarragon. I've got some parsley. I've got the collard greens. I've got some dill. And if you do use chives, and you guys eat, please. I'm used to talking over people eating all the time. If you do use chives, then we want to save these till the end, right? Because we don't want to bruise those again. But what we're going to do now, and this is actually something I learned from a different Argentine chef that I worked for. But when they make chimichurri, the best way to get the most flavor out of everything is to chop it together. So let me see. I have my microplane. So just like I showed you guys earlier, we're going to put some garlic in here, and we're going to use it raw this time. So we're going to use the microplane to make sure that we don't have any big pieces, since we are using it raw. And I'm just going to do a few of these. All right, and so I'm just going to add garlic. Now, you could use any type of chili if you like spicy, if you wanted to use Fresnos or jalapenos, or you can just use like crushed red pepper. So we're going to add about a teaspoon of crushed red pepper, and I'm just making this whole thing on my cutting board, right? And then we're going to use salt, and we're going to put the salt on here. Now, we're using the salt because the salt is going to help break everything down. Because even though we don't want to bruise everything at this point, this actually gives our entire dish a lot of flavor by chopping it this way and adding the salt. So then the last thing we're going to do is we're going to do some lemon zest. And so whenever you're using a microplane with citrus, and I've zested a lot of lemons, and I use a lot of lemon in my cooking, so I go a little bit faster. But there's a couple of ways. And this is getting close. There's a couple of ways. So this way is the way that I've always done it, but you do risk grating the tops of your fingers, right? So when my husband helps me, this is what I tell him to do. So take it with your non-dominant hand, right? And then you take your microplane, and then use the microplane like against and hold the lemon still. You can do this with an orange or a lime or whatever and then you can kind of see what you're doing. And this is a good way to start. Even though that is easier, it's harder for me for some reason. So I'm just going to do this. But The most important thing, if you can see, is I'm only making one pass and then I rotate it, right? We don't want to treat it like cheese and go back and forth because the pith of the lemon is very bitter, right? So we only want to get that very first layer of the skin that has all the oil in it. And then when you finish zesting, it should look pretty pale yellow. It shouldn't be white. So probably start this way, and as you do more and more, then you can go the other way. But we're going to do the lemon zest right on top. And then lastly, I'm going to use some capers. And so I've taken some capers and I've dried them very well. And I'm going to set these off to the side. And I'm going to switch my knife, and I'm going to chop these just a little bit. And then at this point, now we're going to do exactly what I told you not to do at the beginning, okay? Is that we are going to take our knife and we're going to chop back and forth, okay? Now, we're doing this because we're working in the salt. And what we're doing is because we're using salt and we're chopping all of this into it, it's actually seasoning the herbs very well. And this is how you make an actual like classic chimichurri. And also it's nice because we're making everything, even though it's not uniform, we're chopping the crushed red pepper into it. Because if you've ever, put crushed red pepper on your pizza or anything, and then sometimes you get one piece that gets stuck in the back of your throat, and you're like, oh my God, right? This is going to help avoid that because we're breaking it up. Do you guys, are you still using the tongs? All right, I'm going to make use with these little tongs. But as you can see, I really didn't touch this the whole time that I was showing you guys that, right? Like every once in a while, I would kind of pick this up and see how it's cooking, right? But you don't really want to move it around too much. But I see that I'm getting a lot of color on my thigh and not as much on my breast, which means that more of my flame is coming from this side. So I'm just going to turn it around for a second. And then, so as I think you guys can see, but everything here now is starting to look like a paste. Now, we don't want to chop everything first that way because it's going to turn black. But at this point, because we've added garlic and salt and crushed chilies and things, it's not going to turn black because now this is really just to season it, right? So then at this point, I'm going to grab a bowl. We're going to put the salsa verde, the base of it, right, which are all the chopped herbs and the capers and everything, into a bowl. And then now we're going to add the juice of the lemon that we zested. Classically, chimichurri has vinegar. They usually use red wine vinegar or white vinegar. And salsa verde is usually citrus-based. So we're going to do lemon in this. And then we're just going to pour in about a cup of olive oil. Because this isn't intended to be blended. It's intended to be broken. Does it taste okay? I didn't get to taste this one before, but I hope it does. I made all the stuff ahead of time. So now we just kind of mix all this together, and the idea is that it stays kind of broken, right, like a vinaigrette. And this is great on top of grilled vegetables, on top of chicken, fish. I mean, you can really use it in so many preparations. And once you add the oil to it, it's also kind of preserving it. So you could keep this in your fridge up to a week and use it for different things. Also, if I still have it left over and it's been about a week, then I'll use this as a marinade for shrimp or fish or chicken before I cook it. And then that way I know that I'm going to use it. It might not be so pretty after a week. It might have like lost its color and be kind of brown, but we can still use it for that. So now that I've moved this chicken around a little bit, I'm going to go ahead and, do you guys have the tongs? Can I have them back? Thank you. That's okay. These little fancy tweezers that chefs these days use. I always buy them and then I don't know how to use them. The young ones back there do, but I don't. But see all that beautiful color that we got, right? And really you just got to be patient, right? Try not to move it around. But you could even do this on your grill outside. but you would want to still use like a cast iron or some type of plate, right? This directly on a grill grate isn't going to be great. If you've ever tried to grill skin on chicken, it's always kind of a mess, right? Because it never really renders properly. It's really hard to control the temperature. But then at this point, we can just let this continue to cook on this side. Honestly, probably another 6 or 7 minutes. Or if you wanted it to go a little faster, you could go into an oven for a little bit of time. But I really find that just leaving it on this low heat really keeps it nice and moist and flavorful. So then beside it, I know that you guys have already eaten it. We did the kai, the more broad, like pole beans, where we blanched them and then we charred them on a grill, where we used like a little rack so that we could char them and they wouldn't fall through. You could also achieve this by going in a really high oven, like 500 degrees, toss them with olive oil, a little salt, high oven until they blister. And then they're tossed in a green tomato chow chow, which is a very southern like relish. It's typically made with like cabbage and bell peppers. I'm not a big fan of it with cabbage, so I like to make mine with green tomatoes. So those are green tomatoes with like bell peppers and celery, and spices and vinegar. If any of you are interested in that recipe, it's a little lengthy, but I can post it on my website if you're interested in it. And then underneath it is a Calabrian chili aioli, which is just a little bit of spice to kind of round it all out. Do you guys enjoy it? Yes? Okay.
Turning up the heat for the feast. We'll be dancing to a reggae song, jamming to the rhythm all night long. Cooking in the kitchen, rocking on the phone at Kai's Music Garden.